Welcome to the production breakdown of episode 2 of Jax's Lab. I'm Spence here with Mike and Ken's from the team. So in this breakdown, we will go through the goal and story for episode 2, how we did some of the 3D modeling along with the 2D components, the challenges that we encountered along the way, and then the final product. So why don't we focus first on the featured fellas and the friends, since that's such an important production part of what we're up to, is featuring assets that people actually own. So Ken's, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, so for episode 2, we are highlighting mainly one fella, that is Beth, and her Twitter handle is Lord Smogley. But within episode 2, we wanted to feature Easter eggs of other holders and even of their dead friends. So you can see in this first photo, we have Godwolf. This is Crypto Titan on Twitter. His role is a rock star, so we decided to throw in a kind of a now touring billboard poster for him in episode 2, along with we have 7 friends here featured with all of their handles are listed below. And we kind of just wanted to get people more excited about seeing more of the NFTs that they hold in this episode. And it also plays along with Beth's role as an animal tamer. And kind of, I guess, going off of that, Beth's role, that was kind of our episode, or our goal for episode 2 was to highlight Beth's character that she worked with us to build out. So if you've been following along with us, we've been posting these lab passes with pictures of Deadfellaz and their occupation. So Beth's is an animal tamer, and you can see here, this is kind of our Notion page layout of the 23 early supporters of our project and the roles that they picked. So Beth, this was what it looks like inside of these roles. We had a sheet that our early supporters had to fill out, naming their fella, an asset that they wanted shown within our episode, their personality. And one really cool thing that helped us a lot build out Beth's story is she included her personality type. She's an ISFT, so she's very harmonious, very going with the flow, free-spirited and independent. And we wanted the script and the storyline to play off of this personality type. And we also played around with how we were going to represent her as well. Mike will talk more about the 3D modeling and the character building, but these were just some of the main assets that we wanted to pull from Beth, just highlighting the specific elements of her Deadfella. So with the gold hoops, the white eyes, the band-aid, and you'll see actually some of these do come to life with Mike's animation work and graphic work. And if you want to see where Beth actually lives, she lives right here. In this drawing, it's a little more grim and dark, but in the rendering of it, it's much more of an oasis where the animals go to have fun and hang out with Beth.
Is that personality type, that ISFT, is that Myers-Briggs? Is that
yeah,
that is okay?
I think so. I know it's introverted, feeling, thinking, or I think the I is feeling the I, or the I is introverted and the F is feeling. I don't remember the S and the T, but
cool. So having those elements helps us figure out what that, with the script and the voiceover, it helps depict what it is that how she acts. Cool. Okay.
I think within the script too, I even use the harmony, free-spirited words. It really helped me understand how we could depict Beth, and then also the colors that she would use and like the treats that we built out and that kind of stuff. So it was probably one of the most helpful things when we were trying to bring her character to life in the episode.
Cool. All right, why don't we scroll down a little bit if we could, please, and then dig into the modeling and how the 4 3D environments were built, Mike.
Yeah, so this episode required 4 separate 3D environments that we used throughout this episode. And I think it's just really fascinating to see what the actual 3D environment is versus what the camera sees. So like in the first scene where it's just a shot down the road, it really didn't require much besides like a long plane and then some mountains that weren't even textured and then a glowing sphere in it. From just looking at the 3D environment, it doesn't look like much, but once you see it from the camera, it really shows a lot more and it really gives it that cinematic look. So we can continue on to the next scene, which is going to be the crater. And as you can see from the crater, there's still not a whole lot of details outside of the crater, and even the textures aren't fully resolution. But again, if we scroll down, we kind of see that the final product really doesn't have to be much. And this is something that we really have to think about when building these environments, because we need to be conscious of like how many assets that we have when it comes to rendering, so we don't crash our computers and it really take a long time to render. So if you go up a little bit, Kenzie, to the crater scene. So the highlight of the crater scene is going to be that camp in the center. And one thing that we could have done is just continue building the camp from the crater scene within that. But just for efficiency, we took that and created a whole new scene specifically for the camp. Because in the crater scene, there's hundreds of trees, but for the camp scene, it only required about a dozen. So you can see that there really isn't that much, but again, once you see what the camera is seeing, it really brings it all together. So you can keep scrolling down, Kenzie.
So Mike, I have a question real quick. If we can just scroll back up for a second. You talked about when it came to the distribution of the trees, I think there's a really interesting function that you used, and maybe can you counter that with the scene just below it on the screen now, where we have those just random trees and how those were grown and put in place?
Yeah, absolutely. So when building out the crater scene, I was talking about the process of which I made the trees, and we thought it was kind of funny. And how that goes is when you're creating trees, I use something called a hair emitter. So it's what a lot of people use for creating hair for 3D models. So I essentially made the crater grow hair, but instead of just having straight lines, which would normally be hair, I just replaced those lines with tree models. And then from there, I just kind of let Blender automatically distribute the trees based on the vertices that I chose. So if you go up to the behind the scenes of the crater, you can kind of see that the trees are just scattered around the edges, but they're not scattered where the rock material is, because I specifically told Blender not to grow any hair where there's rock. So it definitely saves a lot of time. So I didn't manually place every tree, but going back to the scene of the camp, that is where, since it was only a dozen trees, I just was able to copy and paste those and change them up a bit.
Nice.
Yeah, so if we keep going down, looking at the final product for the camping scene, we also move on to the interior. So the interior as well, we could have continued building out the scene within the camp, but it was just much more efficient to shift that to its own 3D environment. So as you can see, there's the interior of the camper, and Jackson and Beth definitely aren't modeled the best or in the best position, but it doesn't really matter what we see in the 3D world. It's just what the camera sees. And as you can see below, I think it turned out pretty well.
And if we look at these other assets, so that list on the left where it has all the stuff that Beth tried, as well as the friends on the right, and then as well as the cookies, I guess what I'm hearing from you is, regardless of the scale of how this stuff is built, so the crater is really big, the camp is pretty big, and this is a relatively small box, right? What we're seeing with the three snapshots below that 3D scene is how we're just having the camera zoom in on a very specific part of that scene. So a lot of what would perhaps be extraneous, like you talked about, to build out stuff that we're never going to see with the camera. This is a much more efficient way to do it. So you're building out different stages by which the scenes happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Because if we think about on the very macro level with the crater scene, the amount of time it takes to render a scene is the amount of polygons in that. So if we were just to build the entire world within that crater scene, it definitely would bog down rendering, because if you look at the bag probably at the very micro level, with the scene with like the bag in it that might have a couple hundred polygons that in the other two scenes you would never see, but to the computer rendering it, that definitely would be something to slow it down. So it's just better to separate everything and create an efficient workflow as possible. Because if anybody who's watching this has done 3D modeling, it's all about optimizing for render time, because that can sometimes be the longest part of the production. But I mean, this is low poly. It's not hyper realistic, so it really isn't too bad of rendering, but we still like to be conscious of being efficient with the workflows.
Yeah, this is really interesting. All right, so why don't we scroll down a little bit more if we could, please? And then look at the character modeling, how those played out.
Yeah, so this was the first episode that featured a character. And when we initially were kind of storyboarding the first episode and the idea for Jax's Lab, we weren't too sure how often we'd be able to see characters, because with my background with like traditional marketing for banks, insurance companies, and law firms, I really don't have the opportunity to model 3D characters. So this is a type of art that is completely new to me, and it's a whole separate tools that you need to use and a whole separate workflow. So I'm definitely a beginner. So on the right, you can kind of see our first model of Jax. This was just something to see like, all right, what can I do without any experience modeling it? And Jax was never needed, so I never continued to work on creating the character. But this scene, it called for the silhouettes of the character. So I thought I might as well spend some time learning how to model a better character. So on the left, we can see Beth's character. And I really just wanted to focus on getting the overall shape of the silhouette and not focus too much on like the facial details, and just kind of getting the hair modeled, because that was also kind of a challenge for me, and just creating an overall better looking model. So I think it's definitely a step in the right direction from the original Jax model. And I think it worked out well for this scene. And this is something that we continue to get better at and continue to show more nuggets of fellas in more episodes.
Cool. All right, Kenz, why don't we go back? Yeah, so we can see how the models are actually used in the context of the scene. And then Mike, you described how the glass on that building wouldn't be perfect, right? It would be something that we'd need to add some dirt to. So how did you go about doing that?
Yeah, Kenzie, do you want to zoom in on that image right under creating dirty glass? Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, this is a relatively dark scene. This was one of the early renders for making this, but one thing just to take note of is that right now there is a glass material on the window. And one thing that I wanted to do is like kind of make it dirty, or have it some wear and tear to it. And this was kind of challenging because there's no way to tell Blender to automatically make something kind of dirty or have some sort of texture to it. So you can see, if you want to get out of this image and then scroll down a little bit. So one thing Blender does have are built-in textures that you can use in all sorts of different ways. So that kind of texture on the left with the stripes is called a magic texture. And what I did for that texture is I blew it up. So I made it incredibly large so that those tiny dots that you see are pretty large and blurry to kind of give it some change of color. And then those stripes are pretty faint. And then I just made that black and white. So you can see the final output on the right of that magic texture. And then I simply applied it to that window, and it worked out really well. You can kind of see some of those stripes in it, and then you can kind of see some darker spots. But this was just something I thought was a pretty creative challenge, because again, this wasn't something I was too familiar with, like modifying transparent textures, because from all the work I've done, I needed to make the glass clean as possible. So that was a just kind of cool example of creative workarounds that you can do in Blender, of taking just a stripe texture, modifying it a bit, and then applying it to your model, which can yield some pretty good results. And then right below that is what we use to create materials in Blender, and these are the material nodes. So this is just kind of the workflow people use to create different textures for different models, and it'll vary depending on what you need it for, but this is just what was required to make that glass look a bit dirty.
All right, cool. And then the finishing touches after the script writing, the backstory, and the modeling of the scenes is to do the VO and then apply that to the scenes, and time it all out and have it work. And then of course I don't think we even touched on this document, but the scoring of it, because we get to see it, our team gets to see it each respective step in the process, whether it's very early renders or whether it's completed scenes without music. But then when you add the VO and then the music and maybe some of the sound effects that we did, it adds that really nice cinematic element that we don't simply have without it. So I think that is, that's the conclusion of episode 2. Hope this helped give a little insight into what the production looks like. And anything else before we hop and get into the next, getting back to work?
No, I don't think so. I think it's start working on episode 3.
All right, cool. Well, thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe here on YouTube to get more updates. See you next time.